All right. Well, good evening, and thanks for coming along with us this evening. So, for those of you who haven't had a chance to do this with us before, this is our regular study hall time. Study hall for the GEMS College of Energy Medicine is usually a time when we get together for sort of co-work space. So people can come together and do things like practice or um, talk to each other about different concepts, or even just quietly kind of work together in a companionable space. And the idea was to create something that felt very much like having a study hall period in an actual school or time at a library, where it can be creating community in a sort of less structured kind of way. So every once in a while, we do invite somebody to come and present on a topic and share a modality or share a technique or something like that. And tonight you get me because, um, yeah, tonight you get me because I had a few people within the space of about 4 days. I had several people ask me questions about reactivity. I was going to say reactive muscles, but the questions weren't necessarily about reactive muscles, though some of them were. Some of them were more about reactivity in a general sense. And I thought, okay, of the concepts that we teach in Touch for Health, and I've been teaching Touch for Health for like 15 years. And I'm now faculty for the IKC, so I teach instructors. And of the things that we do in Touch for Health, reactivity is always one of the things that people struggle with, maybe the most. It's difficult to get their head around sometimes. And then there's different applications. So the way that we use it in Touch for Health and the way that we might use it in other modalities, or when we kind of extend that, is different again. So I thought, what if we were to take a little bit of time and quickly review, what does reactive muscle protocol look like as we do it in Touch for Health? And then what does the reactivity shortcut look like that we do in Touch for Health? How do we work with reactives in a more GEMS style kind of balance? And then how does reactivity apply in other situations? So not just looking at muscles, but looking at all of the ways that reactivity might pop up in a session. Because this is like a study hall period, I'm just kind of riffing here. This isn't something that I've got a whole speech prepared for. And if you have questions or anything like that, let's just throw them at me as we go, and we'll just make this a conversation, okay? So that it's not just me talking to myself here. Because I'm assuming that those of you who came are here because you have questions about how reactivity and everything works. So let's start with that too. So before I kind of jump into anything, does anybody have anything in particular they want to ask or that they were kind of hoping for a review of in this time that we have together tonight?
Well, I suppose the points that I was looking at was the bits you mentioned in dimensions with the reactivity over the head, then some hand modes. I'm kind of okay with the Touch for Health and the muscular aspect of it. It's the interesting dynamic, like when you look at it, something emotional or electrical, or that's kind of piqued my curiosity. And to some degree, a refresh over the SIPS reactivity GB18 points.
Okay.
It wasn't quite clearly explained on my workshop of that. SIPS
3.
3.
Yes. Okay. Cool. Anybody else have anything that they want me to kind of have tucked in my mind here as we launch in, so that I make sure it gets answered?
No, what Mark said. Mark or
Okay.
Marco? Sorry.
Oh, Mark's fine. Marquitos is sort of like a affectionate name.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, it sounds like the Touch for Health way of doing it is not actually the issue. However, if it's okay with the group here, I'm still going to review it quickly just because it is something that I know is of interest to some of the people who are not actually here tonight. but whose questions led me to schedule this time. And so I think it'll be good for the recording. So let's start there, because that is sort of reactivity in its most basic, maybe easiest kind of form. So when we talk about reactive muscles in a Touch for Health framework, usually what we're talking about is strong muscles that for some reason acting as if they are weak. And this happens in scenarios, I usually refer to it as like a superhero kind of complex, right? So something has happened in the body. Maybe you've had a near miss in some way. You know, one of those situations where you step off a curb wrong or something like that, and you kind of catch yourself before you actually trip. Often you end up with little tiny muscles in the body that are not meant to be powerhouse kind of muscles that end up taking the brunt of that kind of movement. And so then they become like superheroes. So you can think of this like how we have the whole city of Metropolis, and you have all of the things that are happening in a big city like that. And Superman flies in and saves the day. And, you know, everything's okay and everything's wonderful. Hooray, Superman, right? But if every single day, everything that happens in Metropolis, Superman has to swoop in and save the day, eventually what happens is, you know, your local citizens start to get a little bit lazy. They're not even bothering to get out of bed anymore because Superman's got it, right? And so you end up with two things happening. Superman starts to get stressed out because even heroes start to get tired at a certain point. And you have all of these other synergistic muscles. You've got all of these muscles and tissues in the body that are not doing what they're supposed to do. So in that situation, what we need to do is kind of put Superman to bed for a moment and get everyone to kind of come out and do their job. And so when I see people working with reactivity in a Touch for Health class, there's usually two areas that people struggle with. One is just getting the sequencing of that balance, because there's sort of a couple steps of things that have to happen in a certain order in order for it to work. And the other thing is that people have a hard time knowing where to start. So let's start with that one. How do we know where to start with reactives? Because I've seen people use their entire practice time just trying to figure out, well, which muscle is the superhero or the bully or whatever metaphor they're using to describe it at this moment. There's some suggestions in the book for things like common reactor-reactive pairings. The better understanding you have of muscular anatomy, the easier it's going to be for you to understand how this works. Because there are certain things like it's often muscles that, for instance, all share like the same kind of origin or insertion point, or muscles that have similar kinds of movement within the body, or in the same kind of group. Yep, thank you. So of course, the better understanding you have of how those muscles work and where they are, the easier it's going to be for you to figure this out. But then we can also use GEMS protocols to figure it out quicker as well. So that's another shortcut. So let's just walk through a basic kind of Touch for Health reactive protocol. I'm going to do like a 5-minute version of this, and then we'll look at some other ways of kind of working with this. Can you scooch over? I need to be able to move. Okay, thing. Okay. You melted. Hannah, do you have any areas of soreness or anything like that where you suspect you might have a reactive muscle?
Oof. I do probably this one.
Okay.
I know the shoulder is always high, and
Okay.
I blame my computer.
I do too. Okay. And so when people say things like that, like, I know this shoulder is always high, that is often a clue that we have a reactive kind of situation. When we have something where it's like the person has gone through a full balance and they still have pain, or they still have a postural imbalance when we look at them or something like that, those are signs. Let's just have you lay on the table because it'll be a little bit easier to show. Good. So when we say a strong muscle acting as if it's weak, one of the things we often do when we're challenging for activity is make sure everything is locked on its own, right? So let's just check. If I challenge upper trapezius, see, I tilted the screen when I thought we might do it standing for a second, and now you can't see the body on the table. There is the body. All right.
That would be me.
Yes. So let's just challenge upper trapezius on both sides. Excellent. Okay, and I'm just going to go through and check a few of the muscles that I might end up wanting to check afterwards. If we're looking at something like the upper traps, I might also challenge other neck muscles. So anterior. Okay. So I'm checking the anterior neck flexors. And then hold your head down. I'm doing a cheater version of the posterior neck extensors. We could also challenge things like teres major. We could challenge something like teres minor. We could challenge supraspinatus, anterior deltoid. We could challenge. Okay, so I'm just running through a few different muscles. Those are all locking up fine on their own, right? Oh, levator scapula. Let's do levator as well. So just tuck in. Okay, and hold. All right. So you can see that those are all holding fine on their own. Now, if we suspect that the neck muscles were a little wobbly. Okay.
And also the levator.
Okay.
But because it was both, I don't know if that might be a Meridian thing, not those muscles.
We can see. So if we wanted to check to see if this is a reactivity issue, now what we're going to do is this time, when I check this muscle and I get the fact that this muscle is locked, I'm putting that information into circuit. So in Touch for Health, we don't do stacking, but we do use circuit retaining mode. So I've brought my feet apart, I'm keeping my hips locked, I'm not allowing that to move. Technically, in a Touch for Health context, we also keep contact with the person on the table throughout this as well. So that's not a rule in other modalities. So I've got this information now that says the upper trapezius is locked. And now what I want to see is what happens with these other muscles, right? Now knowing that. Now, because I've got her on the table, it's going to be easier if I get her to take that circuit. So she's holding that information, and that's going to allow me to move around without worrying that I'm like moving my hips. So let's challenge some of these other muscles. So if I challenge anterior neck flexors, there's just absolutely nothing. I'm not pushing very hard. Okay. On this side, they don't seem too bad. Nah, they're not great. Okay, hold it down. Yeah. The posterior ones are a little bit off on the sides as well.
This one.
Yeah. Upper trapezius is off on the other side. We do levator. Okay, that's off. Latissimus dorsi is off. Teres major is okay. Teres minor is not okay. Supraspinatus is okay. So there might be other muscles involved as well, and they don't all have to be in the same area. If I wanted to be very, very thorough, I could check all the muscle, like all 42 that we do in Touch for Health in relation to this and see what's happening. But this is enough that it does show me that there's a pattern here. So now what I want to do, now we've seen the pattern, we can see that when this muscle is working, nothing else is working, right? I used the example of Superman earlier, but another one that I like to use is this is the mom muscle. So you know how when mom's at home, suddenly nobody can find anything, nobody can create food, everyone's dying, right? But if mom wasn't here, suddenly everybody would be able to function like humans. So let's try that for a second. So we're going to have her drop the circuit because I no longer want the information being held that says this muscle is strong. And instead, what I want to do is spindle the muscle off. So we're using our spindle cell technique. We're squishing within the belly of the muscle. And we're just trying to basically force the muscle to relax. So let's try that again. And you know what? It's not fully relaxed. In real life at this point, I would probably use SIPs to sedate the muscle. Hours of stress. Yeah, can you come back in here? Okay, so the muscle's relaxing. I'm putting that information into the circuit. Please take that. So now the information that's being held here says the muscle's unlocking, or mom's not here, or Superman is gone, whatever it is. Now we need to go and wake up all the muscles that were previously not working. We do that usually by testing a little longer and a little harder than we do because we're engaging a circuitry here. So bring the shoulder and ear together. Okay. When I'm doing neck muscles, of course, I'm not going to be pushing really hard, even in a physical reset. Okay. But what you'll often notice is that they feel shaky at first, and there'll be a second where you feel them kind of come up and start to engage in a new way. Hold it down. Good. To the side. Good. Yep. Okay, let's do the Vader. See, like that one, I think you might have even been able to see when it clicked in.
Yeah.
Right? And because we've got this here, let's check Terry's minor. Okay, and let's check. There you go. Okay, and oh, this one was fine before. Okay, so now we've gone through and we've strengthened all the muscles that had previously been unlocking. And now the actual test, because one of the things about kinesiology is it allows us to show our work. So if we want to know, did this do what it was supposed to do? What we would do is now go, okay, now that this has had a chance to reset, can Superman be here and everyone else still work? Can mom be home and people still be able to find something within the fridge?
No.
Right? So let's check. So now if I test this and it's locking, we can put that into the circuit. And now we can re-challenge those other muscles to it. Okay. We don't have to do all the side ones. No, we're just sort of showing. Okay. Here. And then in the pocket. Okay. And so that shows us that what we did worked. Now, that's a Touch for Health style way of doing it, which is awesome. If you were to look in your Touch for Health book, so I've got my Touch for Health Complete Edition sitting here with me. And all of the notes on this are on page, like basically starting on page 292, where it starts talking about like bully muscles and hero muscles. And then on page 293, there's something that it calls reactive pattern shortcut. It's in one of the blue boxes. This is something that people ask me about a lot in a Touch for Health class because it's not technically part of the Touch for Health curriculum. So there's a good chance your instructor didn't show it to you and it's not in some of the other Touch for Health materials, but it is here in the complete edition. So people sometimes look at it and go, well, what's that all about? So when we're working with this, if we were to go through this technique, so I'm on page 293, if you have a book and want to follow along, or you can challenge it later. You hold one hand over the person's head and check an indicator muscle. Okay, now for her, it's holding fine, but maybe that's partly because we just did a reactive pattern. If the indicator muscle was to unlock, then we say that there's a reactive pattern present. So to balance, we use the switch on exercise or hold the navel while holding the ESR points. If that doesn't strengthen the muscle, try working through some of these other challenges. So the challenge that it has on the bottom there, once the indicator muscle tests strong with a hand held over the head, challenge by wriggling and squirming, attempting to use as many muscles and as many different actions as possible, including the eyes, mouth, and tongue, for at least 15 seconds. So Hannah, now your indicator muscle tested strong. I feel like there has to be 15 seconds of wiggling and tongue. Okay, I'm not going to make her actually do it because she's obviously embarrassed while it's recorded. But the point is that basically what you do is you engage as many muscles as you can. And then you check to see, like, after engaging everything, is this still holding? Or is there something else that we have to do? So that's a little Touch for Health thing. Now, one of the things that we do in GEMS is use a slightly different frame to find a reactive muscle. And for those of you who have done GEMS flow, you know that we work a lot with the flow chart and with the scan sheets. So one of the things that might happen is, and I'm just going to kind of show something here. This isn't actually the pattern necessarily that's coming up for her. But, well, let's just see actually, is there another reactive pattern that we need to be working with? Okay, So there might be something here that we actually could work with. So let's see what happens. But there's not something you know about that we're gonna put specifically in? Okay.
Either like rib cage or possibly. I know also that these muscles are often tight, also I built my computer.
Okay, so she's mentioning there's still some rib cage misalignment, there's some tight muscles here. Let's just pop all of that information into our circuit. Okay.
Like one of those, if you were looking for reactives.
If
It'll
we were
be in
looking
here
for
somewhere.
reactives. Okay. So, using a GEMS protocol, we would start by challenging element. So we're gonna go air, fire, earth, metal. Metal gives me a change, and then structure. And if you were to turn to the metal structure page in your flow charts, in your scan sheets, if you have done GEMS flow, then you would see that one of the things that we have there is reactivity. And so normally I wouldn't be doing this in a frame where it's like I'm looking for reactives. Normally I would just have landed here with my muscle testing, right? And I'd be scanning down and reactivity. So then I would challenge, are we talking about the reactive or the reactor? Right? As in, is this the over-facilitated muscle that needs to be calmed down, or is this something else that is kind of activated in relation to it? So if this is, are we looking at the reactive? Are we looking at the reactor? So we're looking at the tight muscle, and we're within metal. So our metal muscles are going to be on that scan sheet as well. So we can think about some of those metal muscles. Is it, you can challenge by meridian. Is it a lung muscle? Is it a large intestine muscle? It's a large intestine muscle. Okay, so fascia lata, quadratus lumborum. So our quadratus lumborum muscle is over facilitated. Okay.
When I said rib alignment and also hips.
Yeah, exactly. So that makes sense, right? That's exactly what you were talking about. Okay, and so then we already know which muscle is the reactor. Now, typically in a GEMS balance, we would then go to see, okay, what's just the next stress? Because the next thing that comes up might be a muscle that is reactive to that. Or it might be something emotional, or it might be something chemical or something like that. I would usually just allow things to show up. But let's try to agenda this specifically. Let's look for the other reactors. Okay. So we know fascia lata, we know that quadratus lumborum is hypertonic. So let's just challenge. Let's go back up to the top. Air, fire, fire. Fire structure. So fire muscles. Are we looking at a muscle for heart? Are we looking at one for small intestine? Are we looking at one for pericardium? Pericardium. Okay. Pericardium muscles, gluteus medius, gluteus maximus, no, gluteus medius, adductors, piriformis. Okay.
Well in there, great.
I'm just asking which ones, right? Those are all muscles that could absolutely be reactive to quadratus lumborum, and those are all showing. So gluteus maximus is okay, but your medius and piriformis and adductors are not. All right. So again, typically we would go and find, are there other reasons why? But for the sake of this, let's just challenge those muscles. We already know what they are, right? So we've cheated that whole bit where we had to go like thinking about which muscles might be involved. The body has told us. Okay. Let's challenge quadratus lumborum. Hold. Challenge the other side. Okay. We're locking in that information that says it's over facilitated. Let's challenge gluteus medius. Nope. Nope. Let's challenge adductors.
But that's
No.
not.
Okay, so it's holding okay on the left, but not on the right. And piriformis will do this is not the touch for health way of testing it, but this works. Here. Okay, the other side. Okay, so what I'm noticing is that your left side isn't so bad with those, but the right side is definitely off.
Wasn't that the one, the quadratus lumborum that you put in circuit?
I think I put both of them in circuit.
Oh, okay, great, cool.
Okay, so we have a pattern. Now, In a GEMS framework, I wouldn't necessarily say we would have to go through the reactive protocol as far as the correction, the same way that we do in Touch for Health. We might, or it might be something else. Let's ask her body. Do we have permissions to correct? How are we going to do this correction? Which element? Air, fire, earth, metal, water, water. Water, emotion. I'm just going to grab my scan sheets. Okay. Uh-huh. I know, but sometimes I feel like if I do it without having the sheet in front of me, you think I'm cheating. Okay, so I'm looking at my water emotion correction sheet. Five element balancing. Sound. Sorry. Okay. So sound for water is to groan.
Yeah.
Do we need to put an emotion on it? So do we need to put? Oh, is this one of my new things?
Of course it is.
Okay,
Now you have to explain yourself to these people.
I do not. Okay, so this is actually going into one of the archetype things where I'm using the sound balance, and the one that comes up with water is actually groaning with judgment. So it's because the water comes along with being like in the wise woman or the magician state, and there's a lot of there can be condemnation of other people who aren't doing things right. So it's like, oh, right? There's an exasperation involved in it.
Right.
And that is what is coming up for you. So I will do it with you if that'll feel less
Yeah.
intimidating in front of the thing. So are you ready?
Sure.
Oh, okay.
Yay.
I'm yawning, so that was enough, probably. Does that feel good for you?
Sure.
Do we need another correction? Do we need any more stress? Do we have permissions to close that circuit? Let's re-challenge those muscles. That would be crazy if that actually worked for that muscle group, but I'm really hoping it did. Let's see what happens. So if I've now put this locked, I know you can't see my feet, but I'm putting this locked muscle into the circuit right now. And we're going to challenge to see what the other muscles look like now. So adductors, or sorry, not adductors, gluteus medius. Yep. Adductors. Piriformis. Your work is so cool. Okay.
And your new protocol works.
And my new well, I knew my new protocol worked. But okay. So what we've shown here in just a few minutes is let me see what time it actually is here. Okay, yeah. So in about 20 minutes, we've gone through a full Touch for Health reactive balance as well as a GEMS reactive balance. The other thing that I had wanted to mention, however, was what Mark was talking about before. So in the in the dimensions class, there was a little note. I'm trying to find it in my own sheet so that I remember exactly how it is.
Page 61.
Yeah, it's under the protocols and ideas for balancing. And before the morphogenetic stress protocol, there's just this random little note that I put in there that just says like reactivity mode checking with modes. And it was one of those things that I kind of put in there as a note, and then we didn't necessarily really get into in the class so much. So I wanted to make sure that we had a chance to look at it because of the question that you had about that. So when talking about reactivity mode in this context, I am talking about that mode, which we learned in the Touch for Health box, right? So the hand goes over the head, and that shows that there is reactivity somewhere in the body. But can we expand for a moment on what we think reactivity means? So when we're looking at reactivity in muscles, reactivity means a strong muscle acting as if it is weak, right? But other things can be reactive, right? So for instance, you can have reactivity between chakras. An example of that I see sometimes, if you challenge a woman's chakras all the way up, they might all be fine. But one thing that I've seen as a pattern with women in the past, if you have the sacral chakra in the circuit for some reason, because you're working with something that has to do with sexuality, sensuality, relationships, something like that, sometimes you'll see the throat chakra go off. Why is that? There's a reactive pattern. When I'm in this space where I'm being sexy, when I'm being romantic, where I'm trying to be attractive to this person, do I lose my voice, right? Or do I lose my connection with my own power? And then sometimes you'll see it flip. When this chakra comes on, the sacral chakra goes off. Because if I feel like I'm being assertive and I'm stepping into that space, can I also then like be in my feminine embodiment, right? So like that's just an example. You see something similar happen with men sometimes with the solar plexus chakra, which is sort of their seat of energy, and the solar plexus chakra not being engaged properly with the heart or not being engaged properly with the throat, right? So that's an example. Chakras can be reactive, meridians can be reactive, elements can be reactive. When we're talking about elements, we don't usually talk about reactivity because normally we're looking more at patterns within like our Shen or Ko or destructive cycles. But basically any of those energy systems can be kind of out of balance to each other, right? So if reactivity comes up, and it doesn't feel like a physical thing because of the issue that I have in circuit, I might use my basic GEMS modes to kind of go, well, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about something structural, something chemical, something emotional, something electrical? If it's something electrical, which electrical system are we talking about? Are we looking at chakras? Are we looking at layers of the aura? Are we looking at nadis, right? Like, what is it? And then bring in whatever you know, right? And the stuff in the dimensions book in particular is very well suited to that kind of exploration because you've got the notes in there for the chakras. You've got the notes in there even about things like layers of consciousness. Like I've had layers of consciousness show up as reactive before. Right now with the new stuff that I'm writing, I'm playing with archetypes that are reactive, right? And so it's just another way of kind of working with it. So we're keeping the same core definition, as in it, if you challenge these things individually, they look okay. It's when you challenge them one against the other that you see the imbalance. Okay. So I'm just going to pause there for a second. Does that all make sense? Yeah, Lisa, you had a thought?
How, I guess we sort of asked this before, how do you get started on that? Like you're checking to see what's reactive in the whole body, and then you narrow that down, and now you're looking what's reactive to that. But if it's strong, you won't know that. You see what I'm saying? In other words, if it's reactive, oh, we know that. But if it's strong, it's not showing because it only goes weak in relationship to something else, unless I'm not understanding.
I think I understand the question, but if I start answering on the wrong track, correct me, okay? I mean, for instance, when you're muscle testing, it can be very difficult to just identify a reactive muscle because of exactly what you're saying. You're usually only challenging one muscle at a time. They look fine. So in that case, the the trick, the reason why you would be looking at it would be because something didn't work the way you expected it to. You finished a balance and the person's shoulder still looks like this, or it's still in pain or something of that sort. In a GEMS kind of session, it would be much more like your muscle testing. You'd probably be using a scan sheet, and your muscle testing would take you to the fact that reactivity was an issue.
Mm.
And then depending on, like in just a GEMS flow balance, we would maybe assume that reactivity is structural. That's where it's located on those charts, because that's kind of coming after Touch for Health. But by the time you're hitting something like dimensions, the reason why it says check modes is because if reactivity scans up, you have all of these options, right? So once you kind of know what basic frame it's in, then you open that door. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so we're not talking about starting with the patient, and not the patient, starting with the client and checking for reactivity, and it's somewhere. It's generally within a balance.
Yeah, usually there would be within a balance and within a frame, right? Like even with Hannah, with this sort of cheater one that I did here, we still put something in at the beginning. There's an issue somewhere in here, right? And then that gives the body some direction for what we're looking at.
Okay, that makes sense. That's good.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, Kasha.
I'm just thinking, I had a really interesting thing come up in a balance today that I was working on my client, and she had what now I can put language to as reactivity between the masculine and the feminine processes in her body. But I work pretty much exclusively in SIPs, and so I wasn't sure, like I don't have points for masculine or feminine specifically. So the way I went about it is I used the yin or the yang meridians. And I can't remember which ones came up, but I guess I could have gone even further to see if you know any meridians were reactive to some of the others. I didn't probably have to go that far. We solved it, you know, in other ways, but it's just another example of what could come up.
The yin yang integration protocol that we do in elementals is basically that.
Oh, I didn't even get there.
And that's why we
totally
challenge.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's why we challenge the alarm points for those meridian for conception and governing vessels to see which one is over and which one is under, right? And then it's
Right.
yeah.
Okay, and I used alarm points for the other meridians, but not those two. So, or the other organs. So yeah, I got there, but didn't realize I was doing a reactive balance, just kind of backwards.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I mean, we even see the same thing. I mean, we might not call it reactivity usually, but I kind of think of it that way. Something as simple as supplementation with certain minerals, right? Like how a lot of minerals work in pairs. If there is too much sodium in the body, there's not enough potassium. If there's too much calcium in the body, there's not enough magnesium. The levels of both might be fine if you were challenging the level with a blood test, but like the ratios, right? And I understand that reactivity is not exactly the same as ratios, but it's another way of kind of thinking about it. Or how like your guts don't metabolize. If you take calcium and iron at the same time as supplements, your body won't usually absorb both of them. They compete for absorption, so they might end up in almost a reactive state. So you know, just having this like little challenge can add an extra, I was going to say an extra dimension, and then I realized that that might be too punny for this particular thing. It can add depth to what you're doing and open up more doors. And I just wanted to take it back around to Mark had asked about the SIPS 3 point at gallbladder 18. And I just want to clarify, the SIPS 3 point, what you're describing at gallbladder 18 is the interactivity point, not a reactivity point. And I use it in that kind of way sometimes, and you've probably seen me do it in class, because if the interactivity point can be used in so many delicious ways. If you you can use it in that way, like as a mode, to say that we're putting all these things in circuit as if they were done simultaneously. But you can also use it to say, okay, well, these things in the body are interacting. Like the stress is coming not from this or from this, but like the interference pattern between them, right? So you've probably seen me use that almost like reactivity mode in a SIPS format, in a SIPS class, where if something, let's say we've got a specific thing in the circuit, a specific SIPS point, something like, I don't know, expectation stress, and then interactivity scans up, then the way that I would read that would be like, okay, there's an expectation and something else is interacting with that. Like it's creating a problem with this other thing, or there's some other bit that we need in here as extra information. So then I would go looking to go, what's the other point? Right? So it's similar, but not exactly the same. And then you can use the reactivity mode in a SIPS framework as well, especially in like your level 1 stuff where you're working with muscles and tendons and ligaments and those structural kind of things. Because if you weren't going to do a full, let's say you weren't planning on doing a full knee protocol, right? But you have all these muscle tests here and you can see that there's something going on. Muscle scans up as your point. You can challenge which muscle is it that we need to be working with. You can ask the body, is there a reactivity issue? Which other muscles might be reactive to this one? Test the ones that show, right? And then balance them out using your SIPS points to diffuse the stress. Yeah. Does that all kind of make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay,
Very helpful.
excellent. One other thing I got out to share with you guys, I don't know how many of you have this book. Okay, some do, some don't. This is
You would like this
such,
book.
yeah,
Kasha should have this book.
Kasha should have this book.
You would like it.
You know why you would like this book is because this is, if you've ever wondered why we do some of the things we do in kinesiology, not just, oh, this is how we test for hydration, or this is how we test for switching or something, but like, what is the physiological mechanism that is happening that allows for that test to work? Charles wrote about it. So
Yeah, I'm ordering it.
yeah. Yeah, you should, it's amazing. And my copy is dog-eared and underlined and things because when I started teaching SIPs and I really needed to understand the mechanisms underneath a lot of things, this became very important to me. And in this, he talks starting on page, actually, I don't know what page it starts on, but I'm looking at page 261, where he starts getting into the neurophysiology of muscle reactivity. And in this, he starts talking about like specifically the proprioceptive input to the cerebellum from the muscles that are being engaged when you do this kind of test, right? He talks about activating the nociceptors, the pain receptors to enforce limited range of motion while you're healing. And then when the tissue is healed, it should revert to its original length. And he goes through and he talks about like what we're actually doing when we spindle it, when we then test the other muscles a little longer, like how we're resetting the connection between the proprioceptive units and the cerebellum, and then back to the muscles and tendons and ligaments. So you've got this great little picture here talking about like the spindle bag fibers and how those work. So if anybody wants to get into more of the actual physiology, that's the basis of what we're talking about here. Yeah, and I just wanted to make sure that we had that as a reference as well. Okay. So I've been talking your ear off for nearly an hour about reactivity. Were there any other questions or thoughts about this as a subject?
Alexis, do you get sort of like sort of mix of, say, physical aspects, muscles, and emotional aspects, you know, the blend of the layers in a reactive pattern as well, then.
I do.
You do if you ask for it.
I've been I've been told that that's not quite the proper way of doing that. It seems like some people, even if some people are open to the idea that there can be reactivity with different kinds of things within the body, but you're still talking about those things to each other. And that if you're talking about how a chakra is affecting a muscle, for instance, as opposed to how a chakra is affecting another muscle or another chakra, that it's a different thing. I don't know, but for me, I usually start with the idea that it's the same tier category, yeah. But and usually it will be, but if the muscle testing doesn't take you to one of those things, you have to ask the next question, which is, well, what is it then? Right?
Mhm.
And go looking.
Tend to agree, most of my balances mash together literally every system in the body, whether it's physiological or etheric or energetic.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But that's the type of client that I tend to work with, and that's my jam. So yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, what I mean is, like, for instance, I would almost always have an energetic and an emotional stress involved in a physical problem, but it wouldn't necessarily be reactivity. Right.
Yes.
So the issue is more like, is it called that?
Mm.
And I've even gotten into this with one of my dearest colleagues, and I won't say his name in case he looks at this later at some point, and then he'll laugh. But we got into it once about whether gates are reactives, because I've been saying for years that gate tests are a test of reactivity.
Because you're testing a muscle on this side and a muscle on that side to see how they work together.
Because you challenge the muscles, they're working fine, and then you challenge them together and they stop working.
It's like doing the bear hug test.
It's like doing the bear hug test. And he's argued with me that no, it's not reactivity, because we don't put one muscle into the circuit and then challenge to see which muscles are off in relation to that one. You're challenging their ability to work together at the same time, which is different.
Mm.
I'm just saying that this is a conversation that we've had about this heatedly over 3 years. So
Doesn't muscle monitoring just solve that question and that debate?
Well-
Okay, what you're gonna do is challenge gates
mhm.
while holding a hand here. And see if it's reactivity.
Could do
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
all right. Any final questions or thoughts about reactives before we turn off the recording? Okay.
All good.
All good. Excellent. Okay. Well, you guys don't have to hang up. I'm just going to turn this off for the people that weren't able to make it with us tonight.